ever dreamed.
And we're in love with being green.
Oh, 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 life is better when you care. That's right, there's revolution in the air. We don't need no oil to run in our blood. That kind of much is the same for us. We're getting on a different bus. Let me get that solar and bring back the honeybees, and maybe we'll rule since we live sustainably.
Okay, good morning again, everyone. I think it's really fascinating that actually we are our own regeneration here this morning. So every single thing that's going on is changing the context of the thing that's coming after it. I don't know if people are realizing that or not, but I realized it deeply as I started to look at how I was going to open this wonderful panel that I'm about to share with you. But I realized that every single thing that was being said, there was a connection to. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been here listening to the other speakers. So our session really resonates with a lot of what went before us. Marco's talk, I'll just touch on a couple. So Marco's talk about, you know, the difficulties that have been found by the fact that our entire system is based on externalities that are never internalized. So none of us truly pay the cost of anything we're using. It's just not internalized, and no company takes that inside. It's very important to what we're going to be talking about here, which is the metrics. So how do you measure these things? I personally had a Nikki experience, which is that I worked with a sandbox where the players didn't want to play together, and it was about metrics, just a happenstance. The metrics sandbox is not always a nice one. They throw things at each other and take their toys away and run home. So we're going to hear a bit about that. And as Tyler said, one of the pressures, if we can see it, that we're all under now, is that many people are trying to do good. Even many companies are trying to do good. A lot of money is trying to do good. But what does it all add up to? And where is the responsibility for figuring out what outcomes are there, what impacts are there, and has anything changed? So I see outcomes very much as the behaviors changing and impacts as the state of something changing. But so many times we don't follow through that whole thread. So we are on the input side. We do this, we spend that, we put that in, but we're not on the output side saying, but what happened for all of those good things? So it could be doing less harm, but it could also be trying to do net positive, more positive things. So our panel here today, and we're going to stay brief and short, but I have two colleagues joining me up here. So our first speaker is going to be Laura Ortiz Montemayor, who's a social entrepreneur and the founder of SVX in Mexico. So if you just go and have a look at that, you'll find some interesting things. But Laura's really dedicated to building the first holistic investment bank in Mexico and Latin America. And having just chats with her the last couple of days have been fantastic, learning about it. But she's so mission-driven. Her mission is that humanity is served by wealth, not governed by it. And I think we've heard just so much resonance with that today, Laura, so you must be feeling in good company. Laura obviously has all the necessaries that are required of us in our modern day. She has a degree in international business from Tec de Monterrey and many additional certifications, which I could just go on and on because Laura has a great education background. But for this session, starting from her very well-known holistic impact investment spectrum, Laura's really done a tremendous job in trying to bring logic and consistency to the realm of metrics in the world of impact investing. And you're going to be hearing a bit about that from her. And she's joined by, I love it because we have like men and women, and we have young and old, and we have, you know, other parts of the world. We have a great group here. So Sean, it's not to make you feel that way. I know I must be older than you. But I think almost everybody here has had an experience with Sean, and it must have been a good one because all mine are really fantastic with Sean. So Sean is just so deeply experienced that sometimes you feel like, why do I need to bother to say anything? He's just lived through it all. He's led, founded, and financed successful international for-profit and not-for-profit companies. He has started and led the Ecologic Development Fund for nearly 20 years, so there's some major experience there. He's also a founder of Root Capital, Bos Pico Bonito Honduras, and more recently, Regenerative Capital. So I think, you know, we don't have to worry that we're not going to be listening to some deep experience. But Sean also, as an investor, grant maker, grantee, investee, and entrepreneur, over 25 years, has considered impact metrics and reporting as, let's just say, the necessary evil to keep the check writers happy. But I think we know that it goes deeply beyond that. So of greatest relevance to the panel here is that beginning in 2014, Sean co-created a regenerative dashboard to measure the impact to energize 21st century change makers. And he's now collaborating with a couple of us here on this panel and others around, and entrepreneurs and investors to co-create the Regenerative Dashboard 2.0. So my gang has had a little bit of Pechakucha training, and so I'm going to turn over to our first Pechakucha speaker, and that is Laura.
So thank you so much, Holly. And I'm super honored. So many of you have been my teachers, and you're in the audience now. Carol has been my teacher. Kevin Jones has been my teacher. Marco Evangelisti. I hear all of your webinars twice, at least. Jean-Paul has been my teacher, so I'm super humbled. So I'm in the service of regeneration, and today actually inside out regeneration. You can tell from the side, maybe. And I am learning about radical love, but I have so much more to learn from nature, from you guys. I know the collective wisdom is in this room feels like magic, and I thank you for being here. A long time ago, I used to be a banker, and I realized two things. One, that I was only making the rich richer, and I didn't want to dedicate my life to that. And second, that finance was really a nodal key turning point for systemic change, systemic outcomes change. So my life as a banker was not all miserable, but I did question a lot of things like value creation. What was I financing? Was I financing value extraction, or was I financing real value creation? And I come from that first extracted country from this hemisphere, which is Mexico. And I said, what are the conditions to get to the win-win-win situations? So my personal story started with a change of paradigm, of course, like all of us. I came educated in the paradigm of separation that starts in an economic system based in scarcity, and I started to realize through impact investing about the paradigm of unity. And it's an economic system, of course, of shared prosperity, shared abundance, and how all that translates to the financial structures. So in our transition, we realized that we don't only need to change the what we invest in, but the how we invest in it because of the master's tools, dismantling the master's house, of course, and the why, not for exponential growth, but for balance. So everything must change, the graphics, the deals, the structures of everything to achieve the deeper impact. So the more we go into this journey, deeper into the questioning, we realize that we were, only there in a superficial level. So we had to have a deeper experience, a deeper commitment, and we've come to a lot of realizations that we need to still achieve. And finally, we have seen that a good impact solves a symptom, but that the best impact solves a cause. So that's where we started using systemic applications, and I learned about regenerative capitalism through John Fullerton from Capital Institute, and I really went deeper into exploring that and how to apply it in Mexico. So this is the investment spectrum that Holly was mentioning. We basically said, okay, if we look at the investments through the spectrum of outcomes, what is the possible worst outcome for humanity? Maybe our destruction. And what is the best possible outcome? Maybe thriving lives. And the middle outcome would be our survival. So how do we, let's say, realize if our investments are funding actual life or death? Like that simple. So this spectrum has helped us realize and has helped us help other investors in transition in Mexico. We've educated 300 investors, and we're trying to push the line forward towards more regenerative thinking. We realize we need a garden, to cultivate all these cool structures now. So we work both with the buy side and the sell side, which is the entrepreneurs and the investors, so that we have structures that really challenge the power dynamics in finance. So changing the structures for us is very important because, as Holly mentioned, our mission, which is a phrase by Pope Francis, I cannot take credit for that phrase, is to ensure that humanity is served by wealth and not ruled by it. And that comes into play in every single term sheet, in every single investment deal. So for us, the way that we've been putting that into practice is actually finding some deals that need the structuring and the support so that those structures really help challenge those power dynamics. So this new vision, we started applying it to several investments in Mexico, and we found that the conservation sector in Mexico was very donor-driven, and it was very traditionally, with a very traditional mindset. So we started applying this new vision, and we finally launched one of the regenerative investments hub that Stuart was mentioning from the Capital Institute in Mexico City last March. Yay! So it was by 3 practitioners, so SVX, ourselves, a program from the UNDP, which is Biodiversity Finance, and the largest Mexican conservation fund. And we have several advisors, but our goals is to create some thought leadership around the understanding of regeneration, then finding the right pipeline and the acceleration. I hate that word, but it's the one people understand, but it's actually a transition, so that these deals can move into an investment vehicle and we can serve them instead of serving us, right? So the huge challenge here, and I don't want to mention the word metrics really. I want, every time you hear metrics or standards, just think understanding, right? So we need a translation for the financial decision makers to understand the value of the natural capital, the value of the social capital. So the metrics that we are actually wanting to achieve is an understanding. How do the financial decision makers understand, or how can they value the natural capital, the social capital that they hadn't valued before? And so many of you have already worked in that. We know this is nothing new, but we do want to put it in like very clear terms, what processes are degenerating and which ones are regenerating. So I come from Latin America, and I feel really compelled to say that we're so lucky to be the start of the global south in this continent, because we have this huge abundance of the most desired asset in the world. And the most desired asset in the world is happiness. So 7 out of the 10 happiest countries in the world are in Latin America, and behavioral scientists are baffled because they see that it has no correlation to income. We're not very rich, but it has a lot of correlation with companionship, friendship, and love. And basically, it's a beautiful thing that happiness is a regenerative asset, because the more we give, the more we have. And we're here to share it, and thank you for receiving it.
Really honored and also feel privileged to be here and sharing with you in this way. I really want to thank Laura's really inspirational and pioneering work. I feel I'm among my elders, my educators, my collaborators, and I'm certainly on a journey that I think we're in this room because we're on a journey together and in parallel. I think what I want to share with you really on this issue of measuring, but begins with a little of my story. Early in my career, I really was just astounded from satellites we could see, places like this. And I really wanted to understand, what are the people doing on the green side that's different than the people on the brown side of this line? We've seen this line many places of the planet. And it was really early in my career that I learned the places where all that life is, biodiversity. 80% of biodiversity is on lands traditionally used and occupied by indigenous people. 5% of the people of the planet are stewards of 25% of the land resources that are home to 80% of our biodiversity. And what we assume is, where does even our food come from? Corn only exists because of culture, the interplay of traditional cultures and natural systems. Tomatoes from nature were poisonous, and it took that interplay of people and culture. So it's very clear to me, in my life journey, there's huge wisdom being lost in the traditional cultures. On this journey, I think with this regenerative frame, I feel leaders like Carol and Bill Reed, who put this together, and others, helped me see an opportunity of how to reconcile an indigenous worldview with a more modern world, or science Western worldview. And one of the things that I'm on this journey is, one of our challenges that we're talking about today, is how do we think differently? And what part of the challenge? Silos. People, planet, profit. Environment, social, governance. we tend to look at systems and how we measure, how we evaluate progress in silos. And what is so natural in indigenous cultures that I find the living systems worldview is helping me think into is how to embrace complexity. And really, it's been the mentors and leaders among you have really helped me say to be comfortable with the complexity of our complex world, complex solutions, and that's wonderful. So here I am on this journey. How do we make, not just do it alone, how do we do this with others? How do we communicate that we bring communities, investors, practitioners, policy, together with us? And so that's really what I've been thinking about. This is like, ever have that feeling you're out of space, you got the big new idea, we're going to go innovate? So I'm like, I'm okay in outer space, but I'd rather be there together with others. And that's really where it got me to thinking about this measuring impact. That I've had to report measurements to stakeholders of all sorts for a few decades. But I'm also clear through this work that really beginning the measuring impact really begins to being clear about our beliefs, values, and especially principles. And at the end of the day, it isn't measuring outputs and jobs and profits, which matter, but it's really about propelling our purpose forward. Those of you that have been my teachers in this field is really being clear of our sense of place. We know change is place-based, and I think we're often confused about where are we, right? Are we in a theater? Are we in a neighborhood? Are we in a city? The other thing when we think into impact, and again, these aren't my ideas, this is me synthesizing. We're clarifying our ideas. We typically focus on these outputs. We often want to talk about outcomes, but we use the word impact of what is the transformations that are occurring in the world that we seek to attribute to the way we do business. My effort to reconcile complexity with this silos that where the world is comfortable thinking about metrics, performance, KPIs, is to think into 5 capitals. And so we really need, if we look at one capital, we're missing these other essential capitals. For me, implicit in social capital is really helping me think about cultural capital. What does it mean? What is the value of culture? Today, I'm leading a company called Ejido Verde in Michoacan, Mexico. We're planting trees. We're planting trees on degraded communal and indigenous lands. Native pine trees. These native pine trees have been part of the Parapecha culture for millennia. What are we doing with the pine trees? We tap it for the resin. The resin, growing trees in a 100-year-old business group. So 3 generations of heritage trade between forest communities and industry, where they're really good at turning this resin into ingredients used throughout the world, green chemistry, $10 billion market that none of us have heard about. I never heard about. What is in terms of the work and these metrics and how it looks like for me on the ground, our landholders, our indigenous communities, and Veronica's the upper left. This is what they call our resin orchard. On the right, putting people to work in communities on a for-profit commercial basis to restore trees, plant lands. And when I think about what does it mean, before we even measure, what are we measuring? What's the right question? And I'm really excited about reciprocity and really thinking of what does it mean to be guided by a principle of reciprocity in our business. We're moving away from transactional thinking and behavior of how are we building value-adding processes between communities across landscapes. At the end of the day, for me, I think about measurement and metrics is to propel our purpose forward. How will I get better doing what we're doing as a company and with our stakeholders, and really thinking about what are the principles that guide us that inform the questions that define the metrics that are value-adding to our enterprise. In terms of the dashboard and the community that really many of you here in the room and others help speak into creating a way to think about measuring better, how do we wrestle with a world that is comfortable with silos when we know we need to move to a world that can embrace complexity. This is a 6-step process. It begins with B analytics and B assessment, use IRIS metrics, then look at what's missing. How do we look at the interrelationships and connectivity among these different kinds of metrics to then really think into what new ones do we need. IRIS, you may know, how do we use a common language? And I would say around these metrics and numbers, some of us need quantifiable outcomes, others need stories. I think we need both. So this is really an effort to have an architecture, number, quantitative outputs with stories that resonate, motivate behavior. Some attributes that might distinguish traditional ways of measuring to how we might measure better with regenerative thinking and practice. And one of the pieces, numbers matter. They matter, but we need to have fun. I think it was said earlier today, transforming lives is through song, story, tradition. Here we are at the Petra and Charan. This is their version of an Earth Day. This is the best way we are able to motivate and inspire collective action.
So I just wanted to ask each of you, I know I've experienced quite a few, but what challenges do you see in sort of pulling this metrics field together? What have you experienced so far? I know people tend to think that us metrics folks can be living in Nerdville, but that's often not really the basis of the challenges. So Laura, how about you first?
Thank you. So one big challenge I would say is the time challenge. We need to, advance this as it's humanly possible in a very constrained amount of time. So that's why we need, practical understanding, and that's what we're trying to build, so that we can be effective.
Listen, measures, I know having worked, whether deploying capital or raising capital, we need performance metrics. So this is a challenge we have. We want to think differently, and we're committed to that, but how do we bring others with us? So I really landed on how do I invent as little as possible? How do we build on the practices? And for me, there was momentum of community practice of measuring impact around IRIS. Just the conversation of what's a job, like how do you define a job? We don't have a shared definition of a job, right? How many hours a day, how many days? So I just found IRIS, communities of practice, to help us build a common language around numbers. But I do go back to are we asking the right question? So profits, margins, for me it's hectares under management, jobs created. But are we asking the right questions? It's ultimately getting us to really propel our purpose and those around us.
So just keep on, Sean, for just a second. So where have you seen, you just mentioned IRIS, other communities of practice, where do you see that the solutions kind of lie? I mean, I know we're all in a little exercise here today to see if we can move some things, but where do you think that there are some spaces that we could move into to try and move this more rapidly? Because Laura says time is of the essence.
So, there's the African proverb that's imprinted on my head, right? Go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go with others. So we got to go with others, right? Or I'll do work smarter, ultimately faster, with others. So what are the communities that I might nest my work in? I'm really excited about the B Corp movement. It's coming up with measures and indicators and a whole lot more. There have been GIN is another, Impact Investor Network, and so those are some of the communities of practice that I'm seeing. Those are the ones where, how do I wrestle, this impact investment with risk, return, impact, and what we peel the onion on impact, and what does that mean for the world we want, based on some of the observations we've heard today. I think there is an incipient community here.
I barely dare mention it because Kevin might take me out, but definitions play a role here, right? And there seem to be many, many things that go on around definitions. So, Laura, how do we start dealing with that? Because we've got to get some solutions around the definitional issue without it becoming our obsession.
Yes. So we basically listen, and we listen to the wisdom in the room, and we listen to the wisdom in the place as well, so that we come up with a local definition of regeneration, and that's how we're going to start our work, at least. So a definition that resonates with the local people, but of course is drawing from the existing wisdom, as Sean was saying.
And I think just going back to your point, Laura, that it's all about understanding. We have to understand what it is we're trying to do, and then to figure out some good ways of understanding whether we're near it or far from it.
I just wanted to go spend some time with you offline on how you actually communicate these metrics to the communities who are so different and want to make these changes.
So first, we started iterating with a little bit of combat, and that didn't work. When we called ourselves financial revolutionaries, there's a violence that comes with that. When we changed our attitude to be much more conciliatory, much more friendly, and we communicated with hope, it changed the outcomes a lot of how well received. So I think we need to imprint hope in every time we speak to any audience that is in another place of transition.
That's why
Getting some lessons. I'm going to be able to take one more.
your thoughts on blockchaining the SDGs?
I think there's going to be a fun session on Thursday night around that, at least on blockchain and ecology. Who's leading ecology for blockchain? Over there, yeah. So I'm not a fan of the SDGs. There's a thing about the SDGs that breaks problems into pieces, but also there's the number 8, which is growth. And I'm not a fan of growth. I'm a fan of balance. So I don't want to speak about. Oh, that would be cool. But they actually talk about GDP growth.
So you probably are wondering sort of what brought us all here. You're not going to be having one of the tracks that's on metrics. You know, some of us could do a track on metric, but you don't have that. So what we do have, and I'm going to come on to it soon because we want to show you that there's other things going on. There are many things going on. I'm just going to very quickly talk about one to make you just fully aware. So there has been, over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, a very large group of players that have come together in a sandbox, not always playing easily, but actually making major progress. And what they have done is they put together a natural capital protocol. And that protocol allows for businesses to look at their impacts and dependencies on natural capital, qualitatively, quantitatively, and if they so desire, in a monetized fashion. It's agnostic on what you should do, but it provides a lot of direction. And this started out just as an overall protocol, which has sector guidance of food and beverage, apparel, and very recently, about a week ago, they launched the finance sector guidance. And it's being picked up very rapidly by businesses, mostly large businesses, because of course it has a cost implication. But we're seeing and working on ways that it should become very available to SMEs. Also beginning to work on one on forestry and the built environment. And this natural capital protocol has moved thousands of businesses that previously had absolutely no idea about anything other than how they measured their standard environmental impacts, but did not understand a thing about their dependencies or about how those impacts, in fact, could be internalized into their business model. That's its main strength. Recently, another coalition, which overlaps, has moved into the social and human capital range. And this has been an incredibly vibrant place. It's obviously a lot more tricky than some of the natural capital work. They've just released a zero draft on the 17th of April. And you see the URL there. They're looking, it's a consultation draft. It's going globally as a consultation draft. And I think that just shows the sort of openness of it. They want the sandbox to go wide open. They're going to be doing this for a couple of months. So anybody that wants to participate in that, please feel free. The whole thing is about measuring and valuing for better business decisions. It's to help the businesses to do their decisions better. It's not to whack them over the head. It's to help them see what could we do to minimize these negative impacts, optimize the positive impacts, and understand what's going to happen as resource scarcity starts to drive, whether it's human resources, whether it's natural resources, how it's going to drive their business.
We're in love with being green.
Oh, 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 life is better when you care. That's right, there's revolution in the air. We don't need no oil to run in our blood. Economy much the same for us. We're getting on to